The opera is about to begin.
That worked. Can you all hear me? Yes, I think you can hear me. Okay, good morning. What a terrific way for Adrienne to get us started. If we can only start our mornings that way on a regular basis, that would be lovely. We're delighted to have so many of our colleagues in the room here this morning to launch our very first campus conversation and to unveil the great information that we learned in the second administration for the Thriving Workplace Initiative. As I was preparing for my opening remarks, I was reminded of one of the critical things that was important to us as part of this initiative. And one of those things is the importance of offering voice and inviting people to share their voice about what their experiences are in the workplace here. And so I figured what better way to start our morning by making sure that we all have voice. As a way to kick off top of the hour. I am going to make a request in the spirit of voices being heard and in the spirit of engagement and inclusion. And don't worry, I see some worried faces. Don't worry, not a big deal request. But I'm going to ask for the folks in the room, and there are folks in our expanded room. We have several colleagues across the state of Maryland in our extension locations joining us through WebEx. But I'm going to ask that everyone, after I have said good morning, that all of you share your voice by offering a hearty good morning back. Are we good? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. That is so joyful for me. Thank you. Thank you for making sure that your voice is also heard amongst the community this morning. My name is Cynthia Edmunds. I'm part of the President's Office. I am one of the incubators of this initiative, very proudly so, and I'm the President's Office representative for the Thriving Workplace Initiative. We have so much to cover this morning, but first I want to offer extraordinary gratitude for you sharing the next hour with us. Again, for those in the room and for our colleagues in our extended room. I would also like to start our morning with a couple of very special things. One, I want to thank Michelle Eastman, and I lost track of you. Michelle, will you let us know where you are? Michelle, stand up. We need to see all of you. Thank you, and I apologize if you're upset that I did that. She didn't know I was going to do that. But I think we all want to thank Michelle, because Michelle has been an extraordinary supporter and our sponsor for this initiative, and is overjoyed every time she hears all of the great work that all of you are doing across campus. And so, in particular, I want to be sure to thank Michelle. I also want to thank our colleagues from Extension who are really working hard to help us with all the technology, because folks of a certain age need even more help when it comes to that. And so thank you for our colleagues at Extension that are helping us with the technology this morning. Before we get into our presentation, there are a few more things I need to mention. One, you will notice that there are a number of resources on your table. Please be sure that you take one of those with you. And I understand that we need to offer more, and so hopefully we have a way of being able to get your names if you did not get a copy of the resources. In the spirit of saving trees, the resources are double-sided, so please, as you review those, be sure to flip the page so that you can learn more information. Also on your tables are index cards. Please write down whatever questions you have. We're going to be collecting those index cards at the end of the hour. We want to be sure that we answer your questions and that they are answered as a part of our frequently asked questions page on the website. If you have a question in which you would like a personal response back, please be sure to email your question to thrivingworkplace at UMD.edu. thrivingworkplace@umd.edu. And so Adrienne was directing everyone's attention to the poll. We're going to be doing some polling this morning. And so one of the things that we asked is, how long have you been here at Maryland? And so if you have not done that already, if you could be sure to quickly get out your device and answer that. Okay, so the results of that question are, wow, oh, and the numbers are changing. This is exciting. So we have a terrific cross-section of folks in the room, several people who have been here 10 years or less. And again, we welcome all of you. So hopefully this page is familiar to most of you. It is the welcoming page of the Thriving Workplace Initiative site on the President's website. Before we even launched the initiative, it's important for you all to know that we literally spent years focusing on this important topic. And as part of that, spent those years identifying needs, right? And as a part of the need, we felt that it was incredibly important to create an experience in which we are investing in the people who are actually doing the great work in this institution. We have so much pride of so many terrific, successful initiatives, programs, all that comes from the work that you do. And we felt it was especially important to have a strategic and innovative and fearless, frankly, investment in the people who do the great work in this institution. It is important to us as a part of this initiative that everybody in this institution knows that they matter. So for the folks in the room, whether you are faculty or staff, the work that you do matters. The role that you have matters. If it didn't, it would not exist, right? And so we really spent a lot of time really trying to be clear on what our need is. And while we have a need, we have an aspiration and a bottom line. And so our vision as part of the aspiration is to make Maryland a great place to work. And while that seems overly simple, it has great gravity to it, right? Making Maryland a great place to work would look like a community where everyone not only was connected and committed and passionate about the work that they do, but also connected and committed to the folks that they work with and to the institution that we all serve. The reason this is important, bottom line, is making sure that as faculty and staff that we're doing the great work of the university in a more effective way and more innovatively and with greater impact. So over the past 18 months, you all have done a tremendous amount of work, and we are here to see the fruits of your labor. You not only took the survey twice, hopefully, you quickly wanted to see what the data reflected, right? We took a look at the results, and then you had a conversation about it, right? So you looked at the results, you had a conversation, and then you decided to take action, right? Because we are asking people what they're experiencing, and we're talking about it, we are daring to decide what do we want to do about that. And then there was more that was needed, right? You wanted more tools, and so we offered a number of different things, including joining the Thriving Workplace listserv that offers a number of different resources that you could use that are immediately applicable. And then we enjoyed all the curiosity that continued to happen, where folks were showing up for developmental sessions like Thrive Thursday. And then we have folks who really believed in embedding this notion of thriving workplace and were part of our inaugural Sharpen My Saw cohort program. And so all of this is work that you have done in 18 months' time. So imagine the continued effort, what it will yield in years to come. And so while you have done all of this, we have all been engaged as a part of this in making sure that we're all engaged in new conversations and in actions that are literally changing the fabric of our institution. For that, we are offering each other a round of applause. Please give yourselves a round of applause. And so today we want to continue the conversation. We want to be sure that our dear colleague from Gallup is here to talk about research in the higher ed landscape. We're also going to be focusing on the unveiling of the Thriving Workplace results, and then we're going to be looking at more ways that we can have resources to take action on the results. Allow me to introduce our dear friend, our dear Gallup friend and colleague, who has been in partnership with us from before day one, I want to say. Brandon Busteed is here to join us. Brandon is the Executive Director of Education and Workforce Development at Gallup Organization. Please join me in welcoming Brandon.
Good morning. Let's see, we made you do it twice now as a trick. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you. I was asked to speak briefly to provide a little bit more background around what does this thing called engagement really mean, right? When we talk about employee engagement, we talk about thriving campuses or thriving workplaces. there are indeed research definitions underneath those things, right? So in part, these are things that you can feel, right? You don't necessarily need a survey to understand whether this is an engaged and thriving workplace. You can feel it. You can feel it when you walk into schools, by the way. You can also measure it in surveys, and it comes from, critically, the voices of people who are willing to respond and share those voices. So here's the backdrop of this, though. Gallup has been studying workplace engagement for decades now, and we have surveyed, at this point, more than 15 million people around the globe, asking them questions about how they're doing at work. So this is across all types of organizations, right? Businesses, government organizations, foundations, colleges and universities, K-12 schools. We've kind of surveyed every single industry, and we've also done it across the globe, now more than 165 countries. So there's a little bit of secret sauce that's gone behind this. When we first started doing this work decades ago, we asked people to fill out a survey that had 182 questions on it. And you've all taken one of those surveys. One of our goals at Gallup is to make sure we never administer a survey with 182 questions ever again. But how you get there is you try to figure out which of those questions actually really matter. And we test those things, like, for example, how you respond to a question to see if that has anything to do with key performance indicators like your productivity or absenteeism or sick days or whatever it might be, right? And in different organizations, there's different key performance indicators. We do this when we study students as well, right? Do they graduate on time? Do they have higher GPA? Those would be key performance indicators for students. But here's the simple point, is that we've whittled down this work to a handful of precious questions. Precious because these are the strongest predictors of success in the workplace, right? Success on a college or university campus. So these are the questions that you could argue matter the most, and how you answer them tells you a lot about how you're doing in work as well. And it tells you about the team that you're a part of and the broader cultural organization. So you've all hopefully taken this survey and you've seen some of these questions, but there are things that are pretty fundamental. They're about your emotional engagement in work. That's the best descriptor I have around this. It's a lot about knowing what's expected of you. And that seems like a really simple question. I know what's expected of me at work. A little over 40% of people who show up for work every day in the United States strongly agree to that. Can you believe it? Less than half of the people in the United States say, yep, I know what's expected of me at work. I mean, it seems like a relatively low bar, but you start there, and then you get into questions that become more and more important in terms of your overall development. Things like whether you feel like you're learning and growing in your role. One of the most important questions. Do you have a chance to do what you're best at each day? And it's not worded all day long, but at least some point in the day, do you touch that moment where you do something that you're really great at? My point is that we've been able to validate these questions through research. They also kind of have face validity to them, because when you read the questions and you answer those questions, they're usually an answer that you give a pretty strong feeling to, right? Either strongly agree or strongly disagree. It's actually pretty rare that people are like, yeah, I don't know, kind of, sort of. And so what's interesting about these is that we then categorize them into what we call engaged, not engaged, and actively disengaged. I'm just going to briefly describe this because you'll see these things reported. Engagement at work, the way we define this, is a fairly high bar, right? These are the folks who come to work every day really fired up about being there. They bring the new ideas and energy. If I said, hey, could you be here at 8? You'd be here at 7:30. And if you were getting ready to go home and walk out the door, and I said, hey, can you help me with something? You'd go, yeah, sure. What can I do? The folks who aren't engaged, and this is an important point, because in most organizations we survey, right, you can see this is the national data, only 33% of the roughly 100 million people who show up for work every day in the United States are truly engaged in their work. You'll see the majority, about 50%, are not engaged. Now, these are folks who are doing a fine job in their job, right? If I say be there at 8, they clock in right at 8, they leave right at 5, right? So it's not that they're performing poorly, but they're also not bringing their whole self to their work, right? They're not on the weekends thinking about a new idea that they might, bring to the office. And then, unfortunately, we have a category of folks who are what our researchers call actively disengaged. And what that means is these are folks who are not just miserable, where they'd keep it to themselves, right? They're miserable and they try to spread that misery and their complaints about their job and the workplace to everybody else, right? So if you had an awesome idea and I was actively disengaged, I would come and sit there with you until that idea goes away. Has anybody seen the movie Office Space? Yeah. Okay. You have a sense of what I mean when I say actively disengaged. So as you see this data, right, and you think about improving these metrics, right, the most important part of this ball game is shifting people from the not engaged to the engaged category. A lot of times it's the case that if somebody's actively disengaged, right, it's going to be one of the hardest things to move them from a place where they're actively disengaged to totally engaged. By the way, it happens. But the most important thing to think about here is to take the 51%, again, this is national data, that are in this category of open to being more motivated, right, doing their jobs in a fine way, but obviously have not been supported in ways that help move the needle. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds of this detail other than to say that when we study colleges and universities, if you think about that as a category of type of industry or whatever, you'll see that colleges and universities are mainly in the bottom quartile of our global engagement database in terms of measures of engagement. Few of these metrics are in the bottom quartile. The others are barely into the second quartile. And interestingly enough, look at the very top one on this list. In the last year, I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. Staff and faculty at colleges and universities are in the 26th percentile in that question, which in a way is a small tragic irony in the grand scheme of things because we think of ourselves as learning organizations. And yet, one of the important questions that I think we need to bring to our work is, although we're thinking about learning a lot for our students, are we thinking about learning for ourselves? Are we thinking about learning and growth for ourselves? That becomes a really critical question. Now, again, this is higher ed specific data. And if you look at the questions that matter most, that drive engagement more than the other questions for higher education, you can see that the most important one is the one I just mentioned, that you've had opportunities to learn and grow in the last year. And that can be defined in many different ways. In some cases, they may be formal training and certifications. In other ways, it might be somebody giving you new responsibilities and letting you do more of the things that you like to do. There's a whole bunch of ways we can get there. Look at some of the other ones at the top of the list. You have someone who cares about you as a person. This, by the way, is one of the single most important questions for students. If they say they have professors who care about them as a person, they're many times more likely to be engaged in their work and thriving in their overall well-being later in life. Do you know what the number one driver is underneath that question of people saying my professors cared about me or people care about me in the workplace? They know my name. Now, it goes beyond that, obviously, but I bring that up because the bar, in some cases, is relatively low. If we want to improve the likelihood that people feel like they're cared about as a person, we need to start by caring about knowing their names. And I bring this one up a lot when I talk about teachers in the classroom. The students who say that are just, frankly, more engaged in their schoolwork. They perform better in grades and test scores, simply because they feel like somebody cares about them. This is the one we get criticized for all the time, and I'm sure several of you in the room looked at this and went, come on, Gallup. That's one of your best questions. I have a best friend at work. Well, it doesn't mean your literal best friend in the world, but it means you have a wingman or woman at work, right, who is a very close friend, somebody you can confide in, somebody who helps you through a problem. That's what it means. And in simple terms, if you say strongly agree to that question, you just have very different outcomes than somebody who says strongly disagree. Interestingly enough, though, that's the one question that higher ed is the lowest of all questions compared to any other type of organization that we've studied in the world. So it's also true, and this is true, by the way, in most organizations, but especially true in higher education, that the longer folks are employed in higher education, the less engaged they are. So now think about this, right? You think about tenured faculty, for example. We think about tenured faculty. There are stars on college and university campuses. What's interesting is a lot of organizations are guilty of this. What do they do with their stars? They go, oh, they're doing great. They don't need any learning, growth, help, support, development, right? Because they're stars. They're doing awesome. I worry a lot about forgetting about our stars because we assume that they're just doing great. Guess what the stars want more than anybody else? Learning, growth, and development. So I think we need to challenge ourselves, especially for those of us who have been in an organization for many years, right? Are you learning and growing? For those of you who are in manager and supervisor and dean roles, right? How am I helping the folks that work with me learn and grow? And again, that can be done in a number of different ways. We also know as we study this that there's a difference in overall scores between faculty and staff. Staff on average in higher ed are slightly more likely to be engaged in work than faculty. And I think there's an important thing to think about here because faculty, if you think about it, it's a very unique type of workplace condition. Many faculty are individual performers, right? You actually get tenure faster by publishing articles by yourself than collaborating with multiple research partners. I mean, these are formulas that are actually built into tenure. And so many questions come up here. What does it mean to drive engagement for faculty members, right? And of course, if you're a dean, there is no such thing as thinking about a manager or supervisor or boss in the context of faculty. And when I use those words, I'm thinking about it in the best sense of it, right? Somebody who encourages your development, who helps you figure out what you're best at and enables you to do more of that. So I think it's a real challenge for higher education to think about how we drive engagement in faculty ranks where it is truly a very unique workplace environment. Now, what's interesting too is that when we study workplace engagement, it's also intimately related to your feelings of whether you're part of an inclusive community. So we have other questions that get at whether you feel like you work in an inclusive environment, but here's a simple point. Some of the questions on this engagement survey matter a lot to your feelings of inclusivity. In fact, 4 questions on this survey predict more than 50% of the variance of inclusivity. In other words, if we know how we're doing in these 4 questions and we're doing well on these questions, it's highly likely that the employees who work here at this university feel that they're part of an inclusive environment. Guess what's at the top of that list? At work, my opinions seem to count. Your feeling that your opinions matter is one of the single most important fundamental aspects of also feeling like you're part of an inclusive environment. And if you think about that a little bit more, it starts to make a ton of sense. At the end of the day, that's probably the most important thing that you have to offer is your ideas and your opinion. And to want those to be heard means that someone cares about you, that you matter, regardless of your sex or race or religion. If your opinion is valued, that makes you feel like you're part of an inclusive environment. And here's a simple story, and it's going to be told in the data you have from this campus, that in 18 short months between the first survey that was administered and the second one, this campus has made very meaningful improvement in at least half of the metrics that have been studied. That is not easy to do, and it is absolutely an artifact of the work that's been put into the things beyond simply taking a survey. The action planning and discussion, the discussions that you've had amongst your colleagues, right? The sessions that have been done all over campus. In simple terms, when we study organizations that move the needle on engagement year over year, it goes up not because they're taking a survey every year. That's part of it, right? It goes up because they're discussing these things. They're making it an active part of the operating system of how human beings work within the organization. And by the way, this is important to do for the sake of staff and faculty, right? But it also has a very clear linkage to student engagement on these factors, right? So if you say, Brandon, Gallup, what's the #1 driver of student engagement in school or in colleges or universities? I have a very simple answer for you. Staff and faculty engagement. That's it. There's your whole answer. Now, so let me just show you 2 examples from various campuses where we've done both student engagement and faculty and staff engagement metrics. And it won't surprise you to know that consistently, as we measure these things and we break it down at a departmental or program level, the departments that have the highest faculty and staff engagement scores also, interestingly, have the highest student engagement scores. And the ones that have the lowest also have some of the lowest student engagement scores. So understand that this is important for you and your development. It's important for the performance of the University of Maryland, but it also matters because in many ways it's infectious, this thing called engagement. And you spread it invariably to students. And this was my second slide that I was talking about, but I've already made my point. So I'm done. Thank you very much. And I just want to say a huge congratulations to this institution. Gallup has an opportunity to work with a number of colleges and universities, and I can say without any hesitation that the work that has been done here over the last 18 months is absolutely leading the charge in higher education around thinking about thriving workplaces. So, by the way, this also comes not just from a guy from Gallup, but from someone who graduated from a university that's a four-letter word here. So please take that as a fine, fine compliment. Thank you for the great work that you're doing.
Am I on? Am I on? All right. Thank you, Duke graduate Brandon Busteed. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some survey results. Everyone should still have their phone out. We're going to do a little bit more polling. So get your phone out while I introduce myself. I'm Laura Scott. I am the director of the Center for Leadership and Organizational Change. I am also, like Cynthia Edmunds, an incubator of the Thriving Workplace Initiative. So we are going to take a first look at the survey results now. We are going to look at an overview of faculty and staff results. This is faculty and staff only. There's also a graduate assistant experience survey. We're going to take a look at that in one of our later conversations. So we are looking at the data from this year, and we're looking back to compare to the data from last year. We are looking at that in the context of our institution. We're also looking at it in the context of higher education, some of the things that Brandon just talked about. And Brandon and Gallup, these are truly leaders in the national conversation about higher education, about student outcomes, about the value of higher education, and that's certainly an important conversation that we're having in this country today. So we're looking at faculty and staff responses. There were 7,326 responses this year, which is 65%, which is up from 54% last time. And I want to recognize everyone here who put work into getting that done, particularly our folks who are our coalition partners, which is the representative each college and school or division has named to coordinate with the Thriving Workplace Initiative. They did emails, they did events, they had competitions, they worked tirelessly and checked with us, some of them every single day, to say, how's my participation, what else can I do? So we're going to look at that. You'll be looking at graduate assistant data at a later conversation, and it is not included in the data that you're seeing or the data you're seeing in Gallup Online. That is a perfect comparison with last year's staff and faculty numbers. And finally, as my colleague Adrienne says, think of this as a buffet. This is a giant, like a cruise ship buffet. Everything you've ever thought of eating anywhere is on this buffet somewhere. We are taking a first little stab at the salad bar part, right? We have an hour together today. We are taking there's clean plates at the buffet. You can come back anytime you want. You can go to your Gallup Online. You can come back to us if there's some data you want to look at. While we look at the poll that we're going to take in 2 seconds, I just want to say there are about 20 chairs up here at tables. So for the folks in the back, if you are tired of standing, you can come up here and join one of these tables while we look at the polling question. Right? So, how do you think most people at the University of Maryland responded to the question, I would recommend the University of Maryland as a great place to work? How do you think most people responded? Phones are open. Dial in fast. And I can see if you don't have a phone, right? And I know your name too. Everybody voting? Everybody voting? We're over 200 now. Remembering some 75 of us are out in the counties in Maryland voting electronically as well. Oh, good. Some people are coming up to sit down. All right, Brad, let's take a look. at the results. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. Ooh, it's a tie. Oh, it's not a tie, it is a tie. Who's gaming this? Good job. So somewhere between 3 and 4 is your thinking on that, right? So let's see how we did. So on this question, in 2016, the average was 3.69. So that was right there between 3 and 4, as you guessed. In 2017, it's 3.86. It went in the right direction, and it also went in the right direction a meaningful amount. As Brandon was talking about, a meaningful amount is something that shows up in the outcomes that you're measuring. And when you're looking at the entire organization, anything above a 0.1 change is seen as a meaningful amount. So now, we've got meaningful movement. Now we're talking about a thriving workplace. So, what drives the thriving workplace at Maryland? Primarily 2 main things, engagement and inclusiveness. We'll talk a little bit later about action. So we've heard about the national drivers of engagement. We're going to talk a little bit about what's specific to Maryland. So, engagement and inclusiveness at Maryland. Last year, Brandon just went over the actively disengaged, not engaged, and engaged definitions. This is what we looked like last year. We looked at 18% actively disengaged, 50% not engaged, 32% engaged. The other thing that is important about engagement is the engagement ratio, which is the relationship between the actively disengaged and the engaged employees. So we had last year a 1.78 to 1. For every engaged employee, for every engaged employee, the other way, for every actively disengaged employee, we had 1.78 engaged employees. Gallup says that it takes a 4 to 1 ratio in order to overcome the drag on an organization from the actively disengaged. So 4 to 1 is sort of a break-even point. 8 to 1 is a world-class organization. So we're aiming in our first go-round here to end up at 4 to 1. And we made progress this year. We went from 1.78 to 1 to 2.25 to 1. Can we clap? Because that's actually kind of significant. What's exciting about this, a couple of things. One is that we not only grew the engaged, but we shrunk the actively disengaged, something that we really talked to folks about not focusing on. We said, focus on moving those not engaged to engaged. At the same time, we managed to whittle away at the actively disengaged numbers. So that's good news. More good news. There was an increase from 2016 to 2017. Let's look at them side by side. First, the grand mean, the average of all the responses on all 12 items, 3.69 out of a 5-point scale. It went up to 3.76 again on a 5-point scale, which takes us from the 15th percentile on the national database comparison up to the 24th percentile, which means we are almost out of the bottom quartile. Go us. All of higher ed is in the bottom quartile. We're at the very top of the bottom quartile. Yeah, thank you. You can see my goal for next year. Make it out of the bottom quartile. No. And here's my other one, inclusiveness. Inclusiveness was the other thing that we're paying a lot of attention to and measuring. It is, as Brandon said, very related to engagement, but here's our overall inclusiveness numbers. 3.38 to 3.51, which is going from the 25th percentile to the 43rd percentile. So there is some place that we are out of the bottom quartile, and that's in our inclusivity index. We also looked, as we did last year again, at faculty and staff, splitting those up to say, what's the different populations seeing? And unlike nationwide, interestingly, ours don't match the nationwide results. So what we see here in engagement and inclusiveness for faculty and for staff, it's actually lower for staff than it is for faculty, which does not match the national pattern. This does not mean this is how it looks in your college or school or department. When you start winnowing down, we have a number of departments where staff engagement is considerably higher than faculty engagement. But overall, this is the picture that we're looking at. How many people have been to Gallup Online to look at their results yet? They're very nice, very nice. I can say, I think I looked at these all last night with confidence that every single college and school made progress. One stayed exactly the same. Nobody went down. So everyone is trending in the right direction. The same thing is true for the divisions as well. Different degrees, but it's moving in the right direction. That's very good news. All right, so here's what really made a difference. Here's what really moved in our numbers at Maryland over the last 18 months. From the left to right, the items that moved, anything that moved over 0.1, which again is meaningful. 6 out of 12, as Brandon said, 6 out of 12 of our items moved. The one that moved the most is I have a best friend at work, which moved a 0.14. Moving to the next one, it was having the tools and equipment you need and doing what you do best every day. Those both increased a meaningful amount. The next column over, someone at work encourages my development, and I've had the opportunities to learn and grow this year. We're the sort of third ranking. And then the final one in that top 50% was the mission or purpose of the organization makes me feel my job is important. So all of those items went up, and they all went up a meaningful amount. When we look at inclusiveness, as Brendan said, there are engagement items that are drivers of inclusivity. And nationally, they are the same as ours are individually in a slightly different order. So in our case, 60% of the variation in our inclusivity scores can be explained by the construct of the items about at work, my opinions seem to count. The mission or purpose makes me feel my job is important. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. And my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. So those are the same items. They're in a slightly different order than they are nationally. So now we're going to look at this last little piece, which is not engagement and inclusiveness itself, but what drives change in it? What has driven our change in our numbers over the last 18 months? So the answer is taking action on your results, obviously. So we asked 3 questions about that. We asked folks, did you see your results? Did someone show them to you? Did you go on Gallup Online yourself and look at them? Did you participate in a discussion about them? Did you meet with your colleagues and say, these are our scores, what should we do about them? And finally, if you did those 2 things and you set a goal, did you achieve it? Did you make progress towards that goal? So here's those same 3 questions across the bottom: results, action planning, and progress. And then on the vertical axis, we're looking at your change in your grand mean. There were 4,020 people who took the survey both years. So we're able to isolate those people and look only at their scores. And they did the analysis this way. So their change in their grand mean is marked against their answer on these questions if they answered strongly agree. So these are only the people who said, yep, absolutely, absolutely we did that. Anybody who said anything all the way from, are you kidding, I never saw any results, up to, we sort of talked about it. Those are all in a separate group. We're only looking at those people who said, I strongly agree that we did these things. If you saw your results, your grand mean score went up on average 0.1. If you had a conversation about it, it almost doubled that, a 0.18, if you had a conversation with your colleagues about the data. And finally, if you actually made progress towards whatever you set as your goal, it's a 0.31 increase in your grand mean. Those are all like really significant numbers. And as you would expect, it goes up. Seeing the data is just the first step. Talking about it adds to your increase. Doing something about it and achieving something puts you over the top. Now we have a poll question. Everybody got their phone again? Right? So what do you think happened to your engagement score if you answered anything other than strongly agree with the action index questions? So those 3 questions we just talked about, if you answered anything other than strongly agree, what happened to your score? So we're looking at the next question. Yep, there we go. 150, 130. Be like, if I get up over 200, I'll show you the answer. And I'm over 200. Brad, what's the answer? What does it look like? Everything would remain the same if I looks like, certainly didn't increase. Nobody thinks they're really, probably didn't increase. Decreased is a possibility. Well, let me tell you what happens. Actually, if you do nothing, you get negative change. Let me show you how that works on the same vertical axis. If you didn't even see your results, if you could not strongly agree that you saw your results, if you answered anything else, all the way from what results are you talking about to, yeah, I kind of saw them, your score went down on average 0.09, as opposed to going up 0.1 if you did see them. The same is true about the action planning session. If you took the survey and could not strongly agree to the question about planning and discussion, your score went down an average of 0.09. As opposed to 0.18, it could have gone up. And finally, if you answered that you did not make progress on the actions, it went down a little bit less because that's a pretty high bar, 0.08, but as opposed to a 0.31 change. So that's a significant difference there in how people experience having taken the instrument and then not having anybody talk to them or plan or having any involvement with the data afterwards. They're not steady state. They're actually going down. They're moving backwards, emphasizing the importance of going on Gallup online, looking at your data, and scheduling a conversation with your folks. Now I want to go back to this question of a great place to work, which is our aspiration. The University of Maryland is the best place to work, the best place, superlative. We asked it on the survey as, I would recommend the University of Maryland as a great place to work. We were able to look at 403 work groups who were consistent across the survey, and there is a really strong correlation between your engagement numbers and your willingness to recommend the university. Obviously, and yet importantly, right, so that we are looking at a question of what Gallup calls advocacy. The more willing you are to recommend the university as a great place to work, the more you're willing to be an advocate for the institution, for your neighbors who are looking at where to send their kids to school, for your legislature who is looking at how much we're going to get in appropriations next year, for the governor, for a prospective faculty member who's a star that you really want to have come join your department. That's the question that shows how much of a good, strong sales job those folks will get from the people who work at this institution. We were also able, through a regression analysis, to look at the responses to that question and say, what were the engagement items that really drove your answer to a great place to work? And not surprisingly, many of the same that overlap with the inclusiveness drivers. The first one being the mission or purpose makes me feel my job is important. Not that it's a good mission or purpose, but that it makes me feel my job's important, that I am connected to the mission and purpose, and I see how my work how my work adds value to what we're trying to do here. Having the opportunity to do what you do best every day, that's a repeat as well. Having your opinions seem to count, obviously a repeat. Having the materials and equipment you need to do your job right, just a baseline. If you feel like you are undersupplied and under-equipped to do your job, you don't feel like you're working at an institution that cares about your success. So we think of it as, like, bottom line, here's a bumper sticker. Some people like the first one, some people like the second one. A great place to work is a thriving workplace, or a thriving workplace is a great place to work. It goes both ways. Think of it as to each his own. Whichever one drives you more, that's the bumper sticker you can have out of this choice of twos. So that's the data. Now we want to talk about the data. I introduce my colleague, Adrienne Hamcke Wicker, who is going to have us talk.
All right. So we've given you a lot of information, and what we'd like to do is invite you to have a conversation at your table about that. First things first, you heard my chimes before. It's going to get loud in here when we start talking. So when you hear this, That means stop talking, pay attention up here, and we're going to move on to the next thing that we're doing. Okay, so listen for the chimes to indicate to stop talking. So let's do this. Let's talk about this. What I want you to do in front of you is a piece of paper that's called a reflection guide. Take that piece of paper out. You may have been taking notes on it already. That's fantastic. I'm going to give you 1 minute. I want you to fill in those quadrants with the things that are on the very top of your mind right now. Okay? 1 minute, jot down the top of mind thoughts to those 4 questions on your reflection guide. All right, that was a minute. I know. But what, give you more time to talk than to write. All right, so your next activity is I want you to turn to someone at your table. So find a partner, someone you can have a quick conversation with. And I want you to each discuss one thing that you wrote down. All right, I'm going to give you 3 minutes for that. Okay, ready, go. All right, excellent. All right, now what I'd like you to do is have a conversation at your table. I think some of you already do that, so continue the conversation if you were having a tabletop. If not, turn to your colleagues at your table and just continue a conversation or start a new one. And I'm going to give you a luxurious 8 minutes for that. Go.
She's going to go woo.
Yeah.
3-minute warning. Make sure you're sharing airtime at your table.
You know, PowerPoint slides, like if they're
I thought they were done talking. Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. So obviously, this is just the start of the conversation. We hope that you will have many, many more. As we've mentioned also, this is a smorgasbord. We have, or buffet, whichever you prefer. So there is so much here to digest. There is so much information. And we are wanting to now move into action. So let's do this. Let's look at all of this bumper crop of survey results that we have and let's do something with it. So my first suggestion to you is go to Gallup online, get your survey results if you're a manager, supervisor, or leader. If you are not, ask your supervisor to share your results. Ask for what's going on in your particular neck of the woods. I also want you to talk about your results and take action. Do an action planning session. Talk about what they mean for you and your group and what you want to do to make things thriving in your workplace. Managers and supervisors and leaders, we have a couple of how-to sessions that would be useful and helpful for you. It's one of the handouts on your table, so please check those out and come to those. It's about how to use Gallup online and how to lead your own action planning session, so please take advantage of those. Keep the conversations going. We have a number of opportunities for you to do that in addition to what you're just going to do on your own. We're going to host a campus conversation series. Every other month, we will look at a slice of the data around particular themes, and then we will have group conversations similar to this. So every other month, and one of your handouts on your table has that calendar. We also have our Thrive Thursday events. Those have been really terrific and very popular. Sign up for those. And all of you, if you are not on our listserv, we will add you to our listserv at the conclusion of today's session. And every Friday, you will get something called Food for Thought Friday that has 3 very quick tips, quick suggestions for you to read or learn to make your workplace thrive. Finally, we want you to focus on learning and growing. We are delighted to debut our Thriving Workplace Resource Library. So there's lots of information on that resource library. We're going to continue to add to that, so please do check that out. Finally, we're here to help. So everyone at Clock is here to help you. There are Thrive team members in your unit or division who are here to help. Here you have our phone number, our website, and the website address, the library address. Please take advantage of those. We are checking email all the time. Operators are standing by, so please don't hesitate. And a summary of this information that we shared today will be on the website, the President's website, next week. It'll be in more of a digestible form so that it's not just a bunch of slides, but look for that next week. All right, we are just about at time. Before we break, I would like to say a couple of thank yous. The first one I would like to thank is Brad Palig and Bao Nguyen, who from University of Maryland Extension. Please, let's give a round of applause to them. We could not have done this polling without them, and we would not have been able to figure out how to do the WebEx live session without them. So thank you very much. I would also like all of my colleagues in the Center for Leadership and Organizational Change to stand up. Some of them are around the room. Put your arms up, everybody who works at Clock. Yay! The Clock consultants have put their heart and soul into this work over the last several years. And I particularly want to point out Teresa Smith in the blue dress over there. Teresa Smith has put her heart, soul, backbone, shoulders, all of herself into this work. We could not have done the amount of work that we've done without Teresa helping us do that. And so finally, I leave you with our bumper stickers. A thriving workplace is a great place to work, and a great place to work is a thriving workplace. Thank you for joining us today.